It's 4 o'clock in Radio Cairo. This is World of Info. My name is Dr. Amr MABROUK, and I'm with you till 5 o'clock. And today, in this beautiful Thursday afternoon in Cairo, it will be the World of Books. And World of Books today, we are going to present one book only. Yes, one book only. Not as usual, we present 4 books. But I think this book deserves to have an episode of its in and out of itself. And today, the book is called Leadership in Turbulent Times by Doris Kearns Goodwin. We have presented one of her books last episode and one of our last episodes, but this episode in particular, we're going to present this book, which actually is a sort of a combination of her work. She is a Harvard professor, and she has got a PhD in history in Harvard at the age of 25 in 1968, and she had her tenure in Harvard as a professor, and then afterwards as a writer and a Pulitzer Prize winner, and also a member of the Pulitzer Prize Commission and Committee. So when she writes a book, I think it deserves to be read. And in this book in particular, she has presented her reason for choosing only 4 presidents of the United States of America to examine their history, examine their way to success, and examine as well their leadership traits and how they were able to win in a certain crisis. And she has chosen 4 presidents: President Abraham Lincoln, and President Theodore Roosevelt, or Teddy Roosevelt, and President Franklin Roosevelt, or FDR as he is popularly known, and Lyndon Johnson, or LBG as people like to call him. And of course, there are reasoning for that, because these 4 presidents have passed into their own times in order to get the proper education and the proper chance to reach politics and to excel in it. And also the second important point about them is that all of them have passed into a personal crisis, and all of them reached power in a very different way, but in a very difficult way. And of course, the fact that all of them have passed during their presidency in turmoil and in special crisis. And it was for them a very difficult crisis to manage. And every one of them passed successfully in this crisis and was able to fulfill some of the dreams of the people of the United States of America. So definitely to read this book or to comprehend this book, she has divided the book into chapters, and every chapter or every section of the book is taking every president in his own chapter of how he reached the politics, and how he was able to know that he was a real leader, how he suffered in his own personal perspective, and afterwards how he fared in his presidency. And of course, when we talk about Abraham Lincoln as a start, of course, this man was a great man. A man who came from very humble origins, and his father was always forcing him to do manual labor work. And he had the intelligence and the wit and the charm to start to teach himself, to read as much as he can and educate himself, and to collect stories from everywhere and become a great storyteller. By the way, the 4 of them were great storytellers. It's really important for a politician to understand how to fare in his life, how to reach the hearts of his audience and of his people simply by having stories to tell. And yes, Abraham Lincoln was a master storyteller, and through his life in manual working and until the age of 21, he was forced by his father to work hardly, very much in his work, in his manual work, and reading as much as he can, until it reached the point of no return. He decided to get his small belongings and to travel until he reached New Salem, where he worked as a junior clerk in one of the functions over there. And there he was able to catch the attention of the people around him with his good storytelling and with his success in attracting the attention and his intelligence and wit and charm. He was able to proceed even to have a degree in law. So there was he, in a very young age, Lincoln, able to mesmerize the people and to attract the attention of the people. And yet, at this very young age, he was able also to attract the fact that he had his own moral courage and convictions, which outweighed his ferocious ambition. At the age of 26, he made a public statement on slavery that threatened to drastically diminish his support in a state that was then largely settled by Southerners. Yes, he had the will and had the feeling that, as he said afterwards, he believed that if slavery is not wrong, then nothing is wrong. And such a strong statement from somebody in the United States, where a lot of economy was dependent on the slaves, especially in the southern states, this shows you how this man was different. The man had his mind set that he is anti-slavery from the very beginning at the age of 26. He was able to guide his way until he reached at one stage to become a member of the Congress. And of course, when this period he has reached, people thought that this should be a very clear-cut beginning. And for him, this will never end as in his climbing for the way of politics. But after 4 years, and after what even a lot of historians who generally consider Lincoln's single term in Congress as a failure, an assessment which Lincoln himself would likely conquer. He had served the Whig, which is the party at that time, cause with strident fidelity, but the scope of his ambition was higher than party and wider than geographic section. So after failing to have another nomination, he left he left the Congress and ended up by becoming a lawyer. And practicing law was another start for Lincoln, and this was his personal crisis. He thought that this would be the end of his political career, and he has even written in Melancholy that how hard it is to die and leave one's country no better than the one he had, than if one had never lived. So he had the presumption that he might not be effective in the world because he ended up his career. But no wonder when he became so famous as a lawyer, a man who attracted the attention of all the people who attended all these courts. And it was a very strange system when the courts would go around differently and in different countrysides and different cities, and everybody would attend the law and the judgment that was made, and everybody would listen to the lawyers as they would seek the attention and the admiration of the jury. So Abraham Lincoln was mastering that, and as a real master of oratorial experience, he attracted the attention of the new Republican Party, and of course by a certain time he was able to become one of the great orators of this party, and reaching more place in the hearts of the people and the conviction of the people, and until he was able to reach the nomination of this party for presidency, and facing three very important contenders who were more even, as he thought for some time, that they are even more better than him as regards the education or the background. And yet he was able to defeat them through his intelligence, through his wit, through his charm, through his knowledge and his great readings. He was able to attract the attention and become the President of the United States. Well, of course, we are summarizing a life of a great man in such very few minutes and moments, but definitely when a man like this became a president, we look how he attracted the hearts and the minds of the people. First of all, he has chosen the three contenders that were his competitors to be part of his senior staff members. He decided that these people are so intelligent and so hardworking and so loyal to the country to lose their efforts in the times to come. So he has chosen them to be part of his great lieutenants. And of course, when he reached this important part, we also look at how he when he reached power on the March 4th of 1961, it was 4 months between his election and inauguration. 7 southern states had passed resolutions to secede from the Union, and these were tough times. So Lincoln started to try to bridge this gap and try to convince these 7 states to come back to the Union. And when failure happened, he started to try to bring them back, and of course a war was inevitable. So first of all, he tried the peaceful accords, and when failed, he tried to get into war, which in the beginning was lost. And he found out that one of the great losses, or the causes of the loss of this war, were simply that the South was depending totally on slaves. And these slaves were working and taking care of the business at homes of these Southern Army. The Southern Army was completely dedicated to the war and was able to beat the Northern Army. And he was able to take up an important cause, and telling them, the Congress, that people should go and pass into the law that the slavery will be abolished. By this slavery, abolishment of this slavery, and following this rule, it was easily done that the slaves will be completely liberated and they could leave their homes. And he accepted the idea and assumed the full responsibility for this pivotal decision, and understand the emotional needs of each member state, how to reach this. So by gathering all the democratic ideas and getting to function this important rule, Lincoln has secured a place for himself in history. And in order to make this possible, definitely he was very well prepared to stay in the hearts and the minds of his people forever. So how Lincoln was able to shape the world and shape the United States of today through his hard work and dedication and his education, and at the same time understanding and comprehending the importance of democracy, he remains a very important pivotal person in the structure of the United States and the history of the United States. So by keeping his word and by sticking to the protection of the United States and the Union, he was able to secure the country and keep it united instead of failing after the Civil War or during the Civil War. So finishing up with Lincoln, we'll go to another president after the break. You're still listening to the World of Info, and today is the World of Books, and today we are discussing a beautiful book about leadership in turbulent times by Doris Kearns Goodwin. And in our first part we talked about Abraham Lincoln, and now we are going to talk about Theodore Roosevelt, or Teddy Roosevelt as he was preferably called by his fellow countrymen. Well, he comes from a different background. His father was a very rich businessman and was very much involved in New York in a lot of good deeds and good helping of the people. So he felt from the very start of his life to be belonging to such an enriched family. Yet he felt the importance of giving and helping the poor. However, Theodore Roosevelt, when he was first born, and he and his siblings, all of them were suffering from severe illness of the lung, a lot of attacks, persistent attacks of asthma, and in the very few years in their childhood, their parents were very much afraid according to their health, and therefore they had private tutoring. From the very first moment, Teddy Roosevelt has shown great interest in reading and became an avid reader who always read everything that has fallen in his hands. And he liked to read in different aspects and excelling in every aspect that he reads in. At a certain time and space, his father thought that to be living in isolation and to be living in this bubble, the child or all of the children will suffer very hardly. So he started to improve his health and his physical exercise by bringing him even private tutors for physical exercising, for boxing, for all types of sports. And the child started, as in his early teens, increasing his health and his physique. So he started to invest in his body because his father said, you cannot have a brilliant mind without a good body to help it. And so Teddy beginning to improve physically, and his father, who was very well off, started enriching the whole family by taking them abroad to different trips. For example, they went to Egypt, they stayed there for almost 9 months. They went to Europe, they went to Germany, where he received some education in German, and all the times they were enthralled to have more experience and expertise. It was aimed that Teddy Roosevelt will join Harvard, and in order to sit for this exam of admission, which was quite difficult at that time, his father gave him and brought him a private tutor to help him, and he excelled and he was accepted. Because he was fully integrated as a culture mind, and at the same time physically, he was involved also in physical activities, though he didn't excel much in these physical activities, but still he was on the competing side. So reading, studying, trips and exercising, all this brought him after Harvard to go back to New York, where he enrolled in Columbia to become a lawyer. He was not very much interested in the debates of the lawyers as much as interested in getting to know the law and get himself involved in the helping of the people and helping of the poor. However, there, as I told you, that the 4 presidents share in a personal crisis. He was elected as a member of the legislature of New York, Albany, and in this site he was functioning very good and very efficiently. And at the age of 25, after marrying his sweetheart, he received a telegram telling him that his wife is having a baby girl, and he was very happy. As he headed to New York, he found out a great catastrophe has happened. Not only his wife has died in the same day following labor, but also his mother died in the same day. He was totally devastated, and he really felt so low with this crisis, and he thought that simply he has stopped to live. He passed into a severe attack of depression. The only way to find himself out of this depression was go to the western frontier, where he bought a ranch and worked in it on it. And during this period of healing, he has written 4 books about the frontiers and living in the frontiers, which were, of course, bestsellers and hits. So he stayed there for some time until he healed. And when he came back, he has found a way to get more involved in the Republican Party activities, and he was assigned as a commissioner of police, one of the commissioners of the police in New York, during which he excelled and helped to combat the corruption that was happening in this police department, which made him very popular. Also, during his work with the Republican Party, with his culture and education, he was promoted also, or was chosen for the job of an Assistant Secretary of the Navy. In his job in the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, he excelled and had very much the Secretary of the Navy in order to do most of the work and most of the job. And he was interested in building up a strong Navy because he knew that wars could happen very easily, and the American Navy has to be strong and potent. A full site that was really maintained and proved his excellent point of view, especially when he was able to find a way to build up a strong navy to fight in the Spanish-American War, which ended up with the victory of the United States of America. As war happened on the Mexican side, of course, he volunteered as a commander of leaving his post as Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and he volunteered in this frontier war to become a second commander of a voluntary force or a voluntary battalion. He worked very hard with his men and received a lot of popularity and, of course, a lot of gallantry, and he proved to be an efficient officer of training with the rank of a lieutenant colonel. When he came back to with great popularity. He came back also into the Republican Party and was found out that as governor of New York, he will always be a nuisance to a lot of people in this position. So they decided to give him a kick upwards. So they made him to accept the nomination to be the vice president for President McKinley campaign for presidency, which was accepted by all the people to get rid of this self-righteous man. And only one of the Republican Party heads said, well, this is going to be very dangerous because this man in particular, you're only one life away from presidency. Yes, because they were saying if anything happens to McKinley, he will directly be the president. And strange point is that definitely was that McKinley was assassinated, unfortunately, and suddenly Teddy Roosevelt became the president of the United States of America, to be the youngest president ever at the age of 42. Not only that, but he was suddenly promoted to the #1 position, having an administration that totally most of them looked at him as an intruder. They were all the men of McKinley, and the crisis management started. Teddy Roosevelt was a very well prepared man for the post. He didn't try to omit any one of the members of the staff of McKinley, and he decided to keep them all on board and to take their appointments and take their rights and say that I'm definitely going to be working on the same scale like McKinley. But McKinley was, of course, ultra-conservative in comparison to Roosevelt, who was full of care and kindness towards the people, especially the people of poverty. And the crisis that the writer has chosen to see the management or leadership of Teddy Roosevelt was the strike of the mine workers who decided to make a strike against the owners of the mines, because they were having a monopoly not only on the mines but also on the transport system of the coal. And coal was a very important commodity, not only for the working of factories but also for securing warmth for the homes on the northern eastern coast of the United States. So how to deal with such a problem? Roosevelt was having a sort of, this is a capitalist country, you cannot interfere, some of his advisors told him, you cannot interfere with the capitalist world. It's a free enterprise, and you are cherishing under uncherished water, and of course you can pass into great problems by hurting the businessmen and forcing them to obey the law of the strikers. So Teddy Roosevelt decided that he will interfere simply because mainly the ones who are going to get harmed from this strike are not just the workers or the owners, but also the people. And he, as a president of the United States, was representing the people of the United States, and therefore being under the harm of having a cold winter without coal, without warmth, can really affect the lives and the time and jeopardize this world. He was able to navigate these turbulent waters and to convince the miners and the owners of the mine to reach sort of an agreement in order to improve the general condition of the people without very much interfering with the law, and of course giving and paving the road for proper laws to help the workers and the impoverished workers to have a decent life and to get out of the tyranny of the mega businessmen. And at the same time, he was able to save the faces of these huge business enterprises and the famous businessmen, including, of course, J.B. Morgan, and all these people. He was able to manipulate the situation rightfully. So Roosevelt was prepared, was educated. At the same time, he decided that he is not going to sit after being elected another time, after finishing the McKinley time. He decided to have a re-election, but in 1908 he decided that he's not going to get into elections anymore, and he nominated Taft to be his follower. Strange enough, in 1912 he decided that he will go in another episode in order to seek a nomination of the Republican Party. And of course, this made him face Taft, and therefore he went into the elections representing the third party. And both of them, Taft and Teddy Roosevelt, lost to Woodrow Wilson. In 1916, he didn't decide to go, but in 1918, after 1919, he was thinking into going for elections. But his health, that has failed after a trip to Brazil with a lot of malaria and infections, made his health very feeble, and he died in 1919 at the age of 62. So the legacy of Teddy Roosevelt falls on the fact that he was a very highly cultured man, a very educated man, with a heart of gold for the poor and for the impoverished. But at the same time, as his daughter once laughed, she said that my father, or her father, is a man who loves to be always in the helm of the light and always like to be a part of the story. And so if he ever passes into the times, or if he wants always to be in the center of attention, whether this attention is at the center of action, that he wanted to be even the baby at the baptism, the bride at the wedding, or the corpse at the funeral. Of course, this is a bitter joke by the daughter of Teddy Roosevelt, but shows you the character of the man. And I think this gives tribute to the man. You're still listening to the World of Info, and today is the World of Books. And yes, we are talking about the beautiful book of leadership in Turbulent Times by Doris Kearns Goodwin. And today we have just discussed Franklin, the story of Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, and now we are talking about Franklin Roosevelt. Well, yes, the names are coming from the same family. He's the fifth cousin of Theodore Roosevelt. And yes, sometimes people don't know this information, that his wife, Eleanor, the wife of FDR, or Franklin Roosevelt, is simply the niece of Teddy Roosevelt. And he's the one who led her to the altar on the wedding day to FDR. And as he gave his niece to FDR, he told him, "I'm very happy that Our Lady, or my niece, is in the family." Yes, FDR is coming from a rich family. His father was an entrepreneur and he was a businessman, and he lived a very decent life. And his mother was always teaching him and reading to him. And he is different than Teddy Roosevelt in the fact that he was not an avid reader, but he was an avid listener. He loved to hear all the information possible. When his mother was reading for him books, and she watched him as he was making his collection of stamps, and she said to him, "Franklin, you are not listening to me, and I will stop reading to you." He simply recited the last verses that she was reading from his mind, and he said to her, "I'll be very embarrassed if I cannot do two things at the same time." Yes, he was having a great mind of his own. He followed the footsteps of Teddy Roosevelt in the beginning. Yes, he also went to Harvard, but he was suffered because he was a lonely child. He went to Gordon's and school, which was preparing him to Harvard. And during these years, he was suffering, but he didn't want to annoy his mother, who was taking good care of her husband, who was having very terrible terminal heart condition. And as he went to Harvard, he was not excelling in physical exercises like his distant cousin, but he was very much interested to join the Crimson, which is the newspaper of Harvard, and until he reached by the end of his years in Harvard to be the editor-in-chief of this very prestigious newspaper, the Crimson, which is the newspaper of Harvard University. Also, this taught him to be very respectful of all the journalists and the newspapermen he has ever met, and gave them the rightful time during his presidency and during his political career. When he headed after Harvard to have a degree in law, he was enrolled after finishing the law degree in one of the offices of law in New York. And during his stay there, he decided to join the Democratic Party and get Senate of the state membership, and he was able to win this in spite of the fact that he had a very tough campaign, yet he was able to win handsomely. He deserved the title of the Senate, and he stayed there for a certain period of time and doing very fairly well, gaining a lot of respect from all his contacts there. Due to becoming an important person in the administration of the party, he received a nomination to work as an assistant secretary of the Navy, the same post that was held by Franklin Roosevelt almost 20 years back, or more than 20 years back. And he received a letter of encouragement from Teddy Roosevelt, who told him, "I'm very happy that you are following my footsteps." And yes, FDR has excelled in this post for 7 years and helped very much to form the Navy and strengthen it, especially during the years on the preparation of World War I and the years of World War I, where he helped very much and assisted very much the Secretary of the Navy and had a perfect relation with him, that was Josephus Daniels. So when we look at Franklin and his tenure and his time, he, after retiring from, or after resigning from his job as the Undersecretary or the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, went to, in 1920, in the nomination for the Vice President of the United States at the age of 38 years. And he knew that they are going to lose these elections, but he has excelled very much in his work and his exercise of this, that although he failed, yet everybody knew that he was like a rocket on his way to definitely to the presidency one day. But what happened was the crisis. In 1920, after finishing this failed bid for the vice presidency, suddenly he developed poliomyelitis. And by this, he was paralyzed for life from waist down. And this starts the great endeavor of FDR to become a man with a great will. He tried as much as possible to work very hard on restoring some mobility and to increase the physical exercise, through physical exercising, harsh physical exercising, the power of his shoulders, in order that he can walk using iron bracelets, which was very difficult. And yet, for 5 or 6 years, he went and invested in building a sort of a recovery place for polio patients, where they can receive physical exercise and receive the support. And even the people who lived in this hospital used to call him Dr. Frank, because he was giving them a lot of hope in order to fight polio and to fight the handicap. The comeback of FDR as Phoenix rising back again in order to promote the Democratic Party and passing into the elections after the Great Depression and winning the elections and proving himself as the hope of the nation can be a mixture of a lot of things, not just the charm or the wit or the intelligence, but the severe perseverance and the intelligent mind and the great will of such a man to pick up the United States and become a sort of a savior of the nation. His work in helping the people in the great crisis of the Depression, in saving the banks, in his 100 days plan in order to find jobs for the millions of people who've lost their jobs, to secure food and education. All this proves that this man had a vision and at the same time had a very kind heart. His fireside talks that he started during these turbulent times and continued during World War II has made the people so much involved with him. And as the famous statement, when he was the only one or the only president of the United States who was elected 4 times in a row for presidency and unfortunately died from a severe heart attack and heart failure in 1945, just a few days before the end of World War II in the Western front, people were just giving condolences to each other. And they said that we have lost a great friend. And they said that the death of a single man has made 130 million people very lonely. Yes, FDR has proved his role in the life and times of the United States through his perseverance. Nobody knows whether his suffering from polio made him or gave him this great feeling of empathy towards the other and putting always the impoverished, the weak, and the needy people in his minds and in his heart forever. Was this the one who helped him to find a path and to save the nation? Nobody really can answer this question, but definitely the traits of FDR have proved a very important point of view of his great work and his great life. You're still listening to the World of Info. Today is the World of Books. My name is Dr. Amr MABROUK, and we are coming from Radio Cairo in this beautiful afternoon of Thursday. So we're still listening to the World of Info, the World of Books, and we are talking about the book of Leadership in Turbulent Times by Doris Kearns Goodwin, and we are talking about the 4th president, and this is Lyndon Johnson. Everybody, especially here in the Middle East, and especially anyone who is familiar with Vietnam War, always carry a very negative impulse and a negative image of Lyndon Johnson. But how far did Lyndon Johnson really have this negative impact? We have to study his character. Well, Lyndon Johnson comes from, at the age of 22, he was a simple son of a man who was a local politician, and he was involved living in the South in Texas, and he was an eloquent speaker, and his father always gave him the guidance and the confidence to become a good speaker, and he heard a lot of stories, and he was a very good storyteller. He was very much interested in trying to get a proper education. He didn't have enough money to go to expensive Ivy League universities like the 2 other Roosevelts, and he got a degree in education. He had a chance to work in a school where he taught and acted as a principal during this school timing, and through his connection with the dean of the school, he received this nomination to work with the underprivileged school, where he helped the students very much, got very much involved in helping them, and felt really the need of the poor. However, always Lyndon had the courage and the wit to see who is very important and take them as symbols of idols for him. He gets to know them, he gets involved with them, and he becomes one of their assistants. For example, he was the assistant of a very important congressman in order attracting his attention, and acted even like the son he never had. But he was a very highly organized man, and he was always very demanding for the staff of this congressman, and always able to organize the work and to make this man work look brilliant. So he was yes, he could be, some people would say that he was a social climber, but actually he was not. He deserved the work, and he was able to get the proper education, the proper learning, and become very pivotal in the office of the congressman where he worked. And therefore he was able to get a nomination for the Congress, and then he was able to even to reach FDR, and he met him, and FDR was very impressed with him, found him a post in one of the associations that were organized in Texas, and he was a great success there. So he, even when FDR saw him, he said this man could be the first president from the South. And yes, this came on true, although it was a bit awkward how he became a president, but definitely he was a very active man. He found a place, and he, with the death of one of the senators in Texas, he was able to get the nomination of the party, to work hard to get the votes, and became a senator in the Senate, where he really mastered his role as a senator, was able to do a lot of lobbying. He was able to fulfill a place for himself in the Senate, and even ended up in 1955 or something like that as simply the president of the majority in the Senate. And this is, of course, is a very important post. Well, at the helm of this power, at the helm of this lobbying, comes the crisis, and the crisis was simply a severe heart attack that left him in a terrible condition, that he had to recover for a very long period of time, or self-studying and self-promoting of himself, and finding himself having a new life that was given to him. He came back more concentrated and more intelligent and more working as a majority leader, and taking much better care of his fading health. However, he received a chance to become a vice president of Kennedy. And we know, of course, he failed, of course, to get the nomination of the presidency as in front of Kennedy, who was very charismatic, very highly connected, and his war record, all of this put him in a better position than Lyndon Johnson. But Lyndon was chosen as his vice president. In the tenure of Kennedy for 3 years, he remained as almost the silent man, which is definitely the position of the vice president. He only was involved in some of the very minor activities during this tenure, and he didn't show off or show up a lot of his activities and his talent. However, with the assassination of the assassination of Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson was sworn in on the plane in the famous portrait that everybody has seen, and he became the President of the United States. In such a severe crisis, in such a severe vacuum power, he was there to assure the continuation of the establishment, to ensure the world that the United States has lost a president, but there is another one on the helm of the power who's always continue with the same obligations of the country. And Lyndon Johnson has taken on himself that he's going to keep on board all the same people who worked with Kennedy, or the people who thought of him as the weak bolt in the machine of the presidency of Kennedy, and he didn't change them. And he, in a very important sentimental speech that he has given to the joint meeting of the Senate and the Congress, he stood and said that we are going to fulfill the dreams of Kennedy in the two important things that he was carrying his legacy, and who were always stopped in the Congress and in the Senate, which is the Bill of Civil Rights, and the second was the tax reform. And through his intelligence way and his experience in managing the lobbying, he was able, through his connections and contacts, to establish the Civil Rights Act and the Taxes Act, in spite of the great hate a lot of the Southerns, of course, about the civil rights, of course, but especially this one, because he was a Southern man, and any compromise that he would make would really jeopardize his appearance as a president. And at the same time, he always he was able to manipulate the Senate and the Congress to accept this bill of civil rights as a start, which was very important for the legacy of Kennedy and for the legacy of the administration, to give such good heart in the civil rights that attracted the admiration and the respect of people like all aspects of civil rights advocates, including Martin Luther King Jr. and all of his supporters. And he always maintained that my servants and my secretaries, when they go, they were prohibited from going to the bathrooms of the white, or the cinemas of the whites, or the restaurants of the whites. All this has to be completely part of history, not the past, not the future of the United States. And he was able to do this bill. And his second important move was the reform of the voting for the African Americans, because there was a hole in the law. In spite of the fact that the African Americans have been given the right to vote in 1915, but there are in some states, especially the southern states, where they were denied that because they have to prove that their grandparents were voted before. And of course, a lot of people of them, their grandparents were slaves, or their great-grandparents were slaves. So he was able to inflict and form the vote reform in 1965, receiving great admiration from the whole American people. And so he acted in crisis perfectly. This was inside the United States. But what about his foreign policy? Well, his foreign policy was a mess. His involvement in Vietnam, he never taken the advice of the people who tried to advise him not to get much involved, he was more involved in the war. He was more involved in hiding the information from the public. And he was involved more, of course, in 1967 against the Arab cause. So when we look at Lyndon Johnson of the foreign service or the foreign policy to the Lyndon Johnson of the home policy, we find as if we are talking or dealing with two different persons. How this happened, nobody really knows. And his biographer is the author of this book, and she also say, I cannot understand how such a man with brilliant ideas and brilliant character is falling in the category of harming and not accepting or not helping the people. So this is what we have to know or have to call about Lyndon Johnson. But it goes to Lyndon Johnson the fact that he simply decided early in 1968 that he is not going for a re-election. And this gives him a great respect, that the fact he refused to get into a re-election and decided that he is going to retire and not go back to the political arena. His final 4 years were years of dissolute. A lot of people were always giving him an insult, forgetting his role in the civil rights and always remember his role in Vietnam War. So this was a book by the topic of leadership in turbulent times by Doris Kearns Goodwin. How people behave and how people get the training, how people get the education, and how people can excel in times of crisis, with 4 case studies about 4 presidents of the United States. All of them were unique, how they reached power. All of them have been subjected to their own personal crisis, and all of them have seen hard times and brilliant times. And 2 of them died in their presidency, Lincoln by assassination and Roosevelt by severe heart failure. And 2 others lived after the presidency to write their memoirs, to talk about their legacies, to defend themselves, and to give us more light in the end of the tunnel. Today was the World of Book of books in the world of info. My name is Dr. Amr MABROuk. I hope that I will see you next week, next Thursday, from 4 to 5 with Radio Kai.